I have never done a reaction to a Nintendeen video because I know this channel is doomed because it's not going anywhere. It's just grifting off of Switch 2 hate and it'll just kind of collapse. The same way that Demish's channel collapsed after Nintendo stopped doing the free updates for games thing. Um, I'm getting too old for this. It's just kind of my feeling talking about these Zoomers talking about Nintendo games. We all know where this is going to end up. You know, these Nintendo hate channels, every single one of them, eventually their grift runs dry. They run out of things to talk about and people stop watching their content. Like, it is very interesting whenever someone like Nintendeen props up because this is someone whose channel only got momentum because of the Switch 2 launch, someone who has been religiously making anti-Nintendo content pretty much every day and has pretty much spent his entire life for the past year or so just negatively covering Nintendo content. It cannot be stated enough just how pathetic this actually is. It's something I have a lot of contempt for. It's something that I've always been speaking out about. The difference now is that I used to be like talking shit about like Gen X and millennials pulling this nonsense, you know, NES boomers and the like. This is a little bit different for me because this is someone that's a bit younger. So for me, it just feels like I'm bullying someone, and I don't really like doing that. Honestly, it just feels kind of pointless, and I don't really want to keep doing it. It is like for me, I do think it does amount to the fact that this is something that's only getting attention because of Nintendo hate. You know, this is something that's going to collapse on its own without any input from me, and I don't really like the idea of spending any amount of time kind of covering it. But like considering how much he's been doing this, how many subs he's gotten, how much like the most clickbaity thing ever. It's like we'll probably do one reaction video and just see how this goes. Nintendeen, the worst fastest selling console of all time. Yeah. It's also the best fastest selling console of all time because there can be only one, genius. Like even looking at like the video title just makes you just like, what even is this?
How's it going, everybody? Who's ready for a fun video? Before I get into the nitty-gritty details of the most recent Nintendo financials, I thought it might be a good idea to quickly recap a few key points. My argument since the April Direct up until this point in time has been that the Switch 2, at the asking price that they announced back in April, would not see the same success as the Switch 1. I said
Wrong. I love how everyone acted like the Switch 2 was some like monumentally expensive thing. When you can look at its direct competition, when you can look at like PlayStation, Xbox, and PC and see that they're more expensive, like the entire cope that the price point was too high was just a cope. You know, it really was built off of this idea that Nintendo is the cheap like knockoff brand as opposed to the premium Xbox and PlayStation brands, and it just had no place in the discussion to begin with. I always hated it.
That it would be a failure in comparison to the original Switch. On my predictions, and these are predictions that I made prior to the launch of the console, my definition of a failure was pretty vague, but I said that at the current price it could probably reach 50 million units sold. After the month of June, when I saw how the market—
Wow, 50 million units. Yeah, that would have yeah, what a disaster. Oh man, like how terrible. 50 million units sold, like in what amount of time? You know, if they sold 50 million units in a year, that would make it like the greatest console ever. Like,
it was reacting to the console, I adjusted my estimate down to 30 million units. Basically, my argument has been that Nintendo would not be able to reach those numbers, or rather beyond those numbers, without some form of a price drop. Now, from the very beginning of the console's launch, prices all around the world were dropping in some of the smaller markets. Pretty early on, people were reporting price drops in Latin America, all over the Middle East, Southeast Asia, but naturally, I didn't care too much about those prices. Primarily because I wasn't going to be coming out to the public and saying that that's the proof that the console is not selling well worldwide. However, as many of you know, there have been reports of massive slowdowns all over Europe. These have been seen in
Yeah, again, like a bunch of regions that Nintendo has never really excelled at, right? These are regions that PlayStation took in the 90s that they gaslit their populations into hating Nintendo for whatever reason. And in the Middle East in particular, like PlayStation is like synonymous with video game console. So yeah, all of this is just a cope. It's out of touch with reality, and it's falling apart. It's a narrative that is really losing steam. Like because Nintendo is taking off in all of these regions. It's just a matter of time until it's popular everywhere worldwide. The issue with this argument is that all of the major markets are dominated by Nintendo. Like I think Japan is a really good example of this, where they have like 99% of the market share or something crazy like that because of all the nonsense that PlayStation pulled in the past decade. But
the headlines, but more importantly, these have been seen in price drops. The first price drops we saw were over in France. As soon as the prices dropped in France, many Nintendo fans started to argue that it was very normal for this thing to happen in France specifically, because in France, a company could become a loss leader, where they would basically take an L on an item to get people into the store so that they could sell more products. And many people tried to shrug this off as irrelevant and no sign or indication of how well the Switch 2 is doing. Even though you and I both know that when a product gets a discount, usually it's because the product is not moving. It's in a state of surplus where it has more units shipped than the demand. And in order to increase demand, prices have to go down. Now, initially, this price drop was only at a single store, and at this point in time, many people that worked retail.
a single store. Wow. So this is like a really good example of what I mean when like you can't take what these people are saying. They are legit looking at a single store in a single region and then declaring it's like indicative of market trends. Like that's just not true at all. Like it just is completely ridiculous.
In France were reporting that the console was not moving very well. I covered this quite in depth in a previous video. And in order to further prove my point, I verified by searching month by month using a combination of Google Translate as well as the timed search function to allow me to verify that no other console prior to the Switch 2 had seen this kind of price drop this early on in the console's lifetime, at least in the past decade. And again, despite this, many people were still arguing that it's just France and it's very normal, and it would never happen anywhere else. Well, currently we sit in a situation where there is Black Friday deals and price drops all over England, and even in Germany. Germany, by the way, is very stingy when it comes to price drops, more so than most countries. I can delve deeper into various news articles. I can discuss how people expected that Pokemon would see more Switch 2s being moved around in Spain, for example. But I think it's safe to say that if a console has a price drop in France, Germany, and England, it is very much not selling well in Europe, especially when you consider this price drop occurs in the first
Europe, one of Nintendo's worst regions.
4 months of the console's life. And when you consider the software sales, you consider all of the various articles that have surfaced, the experience of people that actually work in retail, and you can kind of come to a conclusion that this is not about loss leaders. This is
Yeah. Talk to people in retail. They know what's popular. They're certainly not pushing agendas, the fanboy for their favorite platforms. Unbelievable. It's so ridiculous how these people are like bending over backwards to try and downplay the success of the Switch. Like, okay, you're going to all these lengths, okay, to try and demonstrate the Switch 2 isn't actually selling. After they actually revealed their numbers, okay, they talk about their sales numbers now. We know it's a huge hit. Like, everything you're doing now is just a cope, honestly. Like, well, in one store in the UK, they had a sale. Like, it's just, what are you trying to pull?
not about companies trying to give back to their customers. This is not a European thing where people in America can scream and pout because they're not getting price drops, but the people in Europe are. No, this is a clear indication that all signs are pointing towards the Switch 2 not doing well in Europe. And that has ultimately led to a price drop. So now you have roughly 1/3 of the entire market of people that could purchase a console being in a location where they can buy it cheaper than they could initially when it launched, also known as a discount or a price drop. Another third of the market being in Japan, where the console is basically selling out every single week, and in Japan, they get the console cheaper than everywhere else in the world. And the final third being the United States. So while I thought that we'd reach 30 million units until the Switch 2 would start to ripple out with price drops all around the world, it actually took less than 10 million units until already some of the largest markets around the world have already started to see price drops. And
What a cope. Like, what a cope. Like, oh, I predicted price drops and some store gave it a discount. So that means like, no, like that's not how this works. Like,
Now, with these price drops and these holiday discounts, two things which are very uncommon this early on into a console's lifecycle, I can comfortably say that, yeah, Nintendo can reach its forecast and can even increase its forecast. Because if around 1/3 of the market is already able to buy this thing at a discount, that would imply that there has been a significant price drop, allowing more units to be moved off of shelves. Now, the funny thing is, in France, there's already been 2 price drops. In England, there have been a couple different discounts that have been applied more than once. Germany is still a minor discount, but it is one nonetheless. It'll be interesting to see how much more this develops into the holiday season. Prior to all of these discounts, the general narrative online was very adamant and very determined to tell you that there is no point in waiting for the holidays because there's no chance in hell that the console drops in price. And this was pretty commonly agreed upon worldwide. Now they're telling you there's no chance that there's going to be a Black Friday deal going into the holiday season for the Switch 2 in America. And I'm bringing that up because if there is a Black Friday deal for the Switch 2 announced in the next week or two, I want you to pay close attention to how quickly they shift the narrative, because that's what they did for England and that's what they did for France. They'll probably start saying things along the lines of the Switch 2 is doing so well that they can get a little bit more flexible with the price, or they're trying to create some kind of competition between the different stores because they shipped out so many units. Or my favorite one, they assume that people just altogether decided to stop trying to buy and scalp things and they're not buying things as intensely as they were during COVID times.
Nintendo is stocking the Switch 2 more to avoid scalpers, because it was becoming a problem for them. This isn't complicated. Like,
Even though we still see...
by the way, you saw a big narrative early on that like you could find because you could find Switch 2 at retail, that meant it wasn't selling well. In reality, they were just sending more units out.
Very clearly, when you look at the Japanese market, the console is immediately selling out every single week when it ships out. And scalpers are flipping that thing for much more than it's worth. And this is primarily because in Japan, there is high demand for the Switch 2, and there's high demand for the Switch 2 in Japan because it's priced lower. But the point is, in regards to this very long intro...
Because it's priced lower. Yeah, it has nothing to do with the fact that Nintendo has like just completely dominated Japan for the past decade. Like, unbelievable.
Production. While Nintendo has shipped over 10 million units as of September 30th, and yes, those are shipped units, not sold units. You can watch my previous video if you need proof of that. But yeah, while Nintendo managed to already ship 10 million units in the first 4 months, and they increased their forecast from 15 million to 19 million, this tells me that the unexpectedly very quick discounts for the Switch 2 are doing well, and potentially we could even be seeing more discounts all around the world for the Nintendo Switch 2 as it gets closer towards the end of its first fiscal year. Now, backing up just a little bit for the shipped versus sold conversation, Nintendo obviously makes their money once their consoles are shipped out. When Best Buy, Target, whatever retailer buys it from them, Nintendo gets paid. As far as they're concerned, that's a sold console. And while shipped units are the units that are most commonly tracked throughout the product's life, because that's always what's reported in these quarterlies, it is very common for companies to also share sell-through units, which are units that actually make it towards the customer's hands, specifically this early on in a console's life. So for example, by the 4-month mark for the PlayStation 4, Sony's financials indicated that they had shipped out 7.6 million units. These would be units shipped through the end of March. But then they also announced that by April 6th, 7 million were sold. So we know that by the end of March, they had shipped out 7.6 million, and 7 million of that was sold, leaving 600,000 kind of floating around. This kind of tells us that the PlayStation 4 had a very high sell-through rate. Now, in regards to the PlayStation 5, we didn't get our first bit of news until July 18th when it said that they hit 10 million. This was 10 million sold through. By the end of June, prior to that July, they had shipped out 10.1 million PS5s. So once again, we see a very high sell-through rate for the PlayStation 5. We see it very clearly. 3 weeks after they shipped out over 10 million units, they hit that 10 million number. Now, with the case of the Switch 2, we know that as of September 30th, it shipped out 10.36 million. From September 30th until November 4th, over a month, we never got any bit of news of how many sold through Nintendo Switch 2s were available. This tells me that prior to the report that was done on November 4th, the console never hit 10 million sold. Because if it did, it would have been very normal for Nintendo to be like, As of September 30th, we shipped out 10 million, and then October 20th, after Pokemon launched, we hit 10 million. It's very common practice for a console to do this.
So he's saying that Nintendo is lying about their sales numbers. So, like, in the official report, Nintendo sold 10 million units by September 30th. Okay, so it was about like 4 months of sales. Okay. He is telling people, he is seriously telling people, no, 3 months of sales, excuse me. He is telling people that Nintendo is lying to shareholders, that they're lying to investors, that they're lying to customers by fudging the numbers, by counting Pokemon Legends ZA console sales as, to the total like, even though it hadn't released yet. Like, no, like that doesn't make any sense. Like, who are you trying to fool? This isn't like a PS2 situation in which you can clearly see the numbers don't make any sense when you look into it. Like, no, their numbers check out.
It's not abnormal. Companies don't only pride themselves in how many units they're able to sell in, they also like to share the sold through number so you can get a feel for how many people are actually buying this console. And Nintendo is no exception to this. They told everybody that they had sold through 3.5 million units in the first 4 days. What they didn't do was tell people how many units were actually sold at the end of June. But they did tell people that they had shipped 5.82 million. And then only about 3 weeks after that, leading to the end of July, they had hit 6 million sold. But when they were at 6 million sold, we actually don't know how many were shipped. And given the amount of stock that we've seen available from the end of July up until this point, I predicted this back then. I'm of the opinion that when it hit 6 million sold, it was already at 8 million shipped. Because all around the entire world, the Switch 2 was available in stock, which means that the sell-in number was much higher than the sell-through number. It wasn't like the PlayStation 4 nor the PlayStation 5. Nor even the Nintendo Switch, because while the Switch launched in March, it was not readily available on shelves until the end of October, and that's when Odyssey launched. So going into these financials, I expected that we'd see a shipped number going into the 10 millions. I even made a post about it. What I was much more intrigued about was the sold through numbers, which obviously Nintendo has not shared, and I think they haven't shared it with good reason. And that reason is because I think they were able to ship out 10 million units in preparation for the holidays to get them well ahead of the curve before Pokemon's launch as well as Christmas, and therefore they have way more units out there than what is actually being bought. And I'll be honest, I think by the end of September, this console was only sitting in like 7.5 to 8 million people's hands. And there are a few reasons I believe that. The first being the numbers that we see that were shipped in the Americas versus what's actually been sold in the United States. Now, this might change plus or minus 10%, but for the most part, the common knowledge is that what's shipped to the Americas, usually 85% of that goes to the United States. For the sake of this discussion, we can be generous in favor of the Switch 2, and maybe say that only 3 million units were actually shipped to the United States through the end of September. And per the Circana data that we've had up until this point in time, we know that as of the end of September, and this includes my Nintendo store because Circana has announced they're tracking that as well, via Matt Piscatella and Blue Sky, we know that the Switch 2 was sitting at roughly 2.6 million sold through. So that's an 85% sell-through rate in the United States, and that's being optimistic and being generous for the sell-through rate. I think it's probably lower than that. And I say that because the console has been in stock everywhere without running out of stock at any point in time for any retailer. So there are very clear indications that there are a lot more units that are still in circulation out there versus what's actually sold. But we can say 85%. But the point is that this would imply that from the United States alone, there's roughly 500,000, if not more, units that have not sold through of the 10.36 that were shipped. And outside of Japan, based off of most reports, we can pretty much confirm and very safely assume that the United States has the best sell-through rate.
Yeah, assume. Yeah, a lot of assumptions, a lot of theoretical things. Like, it's just a giant cope, okay? Like, you aren't going to fool anybody into thinking the Switch 2 is not successful. That's just my mindset watching this. And that's just, 10 minutes of completely worthless content. So this video goes on for an hour. Software sales, Bonanza sales, attachment rate, buyer expectations, Air Riders, Switch retiring, boycott Nintendo. Yeah, that's gone so well. Let's go ahead and skip through it because it's kind of a long video and this is really boring, especially because like none of this is true. So it's just impossible for me to take it seriously. Let's see.
Selling well too. But what we see here are fairly low numbers for Switch 2 sold games. But
Wrong,
there's
wrong. Those are perfectly normal for a viable console. Like, there's only 10 million console units out there right now. So yeah, these are actually really impressive numbers. Like, people keep doing this thing where they're like, "Oh, this third-party port only sold 500,000 units," and it's like, yeah, because Switch 2 only has 10 million units out there. Like, we saw this with the Switch 1 too, where like the sales for early releases kept like spiking throughout. Like, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is a really good example, where like people initially thought it failed, but then over time it became the best selling in the series. So that's kind of my mindset looking at this,
actually more to the
is that like complaining about Switch 2 game sales is just a giant cope, especially when you have like something like Pokemon Legends ZA or Metroid Prime 4 that are launching on Switch 1 as well.
story here, because a big part of the reason why the software sales over these past 3 months were much lower than anybody could anticipate is because of Nintendo's holding back on all of their first-party titles in order to shift as many third-party titles as they can. I have been pushing this for 3 months, and it's time for me to collect my reward. Nintendo is a first-party device. You buy this thing for the first-party games, and on occasion, somebody will buy a third-party title. But let's figure out exactly how bad this is. Now, keep in mind, this is sell-in numbers, shipped numbers, if you...
Yeah. So I've debunked this like several times. Third-party games sell very well on Switch 2. We've seen this. We've seen lots of games in the top 10. Lots of them are doing well. So like this idea that like third-party sales are failing to be competitive or that they're not selling well, it's just a giant cope, especially if it's a port of a game that's already that already existed to begin with. You know, like something like Hitman, something like Street Fighter 6, something like Yakuza 0. They didn't need to do a ton of numbers, right? This is just a re-release.
will. 20.62 million Nintendo Switch 2 software sold in. If you subtract 9...
Okay. Yeah, I love how he just conveniently ignores the Switch 1 software unit sales there. Like, you know, a lot of people were picking up Switch 1 games during the Switch 2 period. You know, like Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild are Switch 1 games that got upgrade patches on Switch 2. So a lot this idea that like Switch 2 isn't selling software is completely retarded when you take into consideration that it also runs Switch 1 games. Like, this is something that these people constantly downplay and ignore.
9.57 million. All that remains is 11.05 software sold. That 9.57 is Mario Kart. Now, we actually do not have a sold through number for Mario Kart, but what we do know is that based off of Nintendo's report, 9 out of every 10 people that have purchased a Switch 2 have played Mario Kart. Now, that sounds like such a weird way to put it, right? Like, why would they say 9 out of every 10 that have played the game? Why didn't they say have bought the game? And I'm guessing, personally, it's because they're taking into account Switch 2s that have multiple accounts on there. Because, you know, you might have a family console that has 3 or 4 users, and all 4 of those users might have played Mario Kart, so that's how they gauged it. Either way, we don't have an exact attachment rate. We do know that of all of the Switch 2 consoles that were shipped, 8.1 of them were bundled. The point is here that you can't really make any conclusions about Mario Kart World. You just know that a lot of the units that were sold to people were bundled in. But when you're looking at the ship numbers, you can say that, you know, like 80% of the consoles that were shipped included Mario Kart on there. And you can also kind of get a feel based off of sales patterns that 80 to 90% of all the people that bought a Switch 2 bought it with Mario Kart. So it leaves a pretty small percentage of people that actually bought a physical copy of Mario Kart at $80. Because again, we're looking at sell-in numbers. So of this 9.57 million of all the physical copies that are remaining after you move the bundles, this includes all of the physical copies of Mario Kart that are currently sitting on shelves all around the world. So it's inconclusive is the point. But when you're looking at
inconclusive, he's gonna try and gaslight you into thinking 10 million units sold is like somehow a bad thing. That like, oh, people only bought the console for Mario Kart World and no one's buying anything else. Like, that's a giant cope because they already have the console. You know, and we're going into the holiday season. Like, Air Riders is coming out, Metroid Prime 4 is coming out. Like, these people are gonna buy new Switch 2 games eventually. So like they've already won at this point, and yet Nintendeen just can't bring himself to admit it.
Strictly at ship numbers, sell-in numbers, we have 20.62 million units. You can minus the 9.57 that's Mario Kart, and you remain with 11.05. Beyond that, you can minus the 3.49 million for Donkey Kong, and now
Minus? Don't you mean subtract, you fucking retard? Didn't you go to elementary school? Don't you remember math? Your math classes? Like, what a retard.
you're sitting at 7.56 million software that was sold that's not Mario or Donkey Kong in the first 4 months of the Nintendo Switch 2's life. But we're gonna break it down even further. On the last report that took us to the end of June, there were 8.67 million softwares that were sold, and 5.63 million of that was Mario Kart. Which means in that first quarter, of all of the games that were available, 3.04 million of them were not Mario Kart. And a huge amount of these 3.04 million included the two Legend of Zelda Switch 2 edition titles, mind you. And this is a very big reason why in the first month around the launch, all of the third parties were freaking out because they're like, this is worse than we could have possibly imagined.
Yeah. Third-party developer. Okay, who was it? What game was produced? Like, again, I've never seen any actual evidence for this. This is just a giant cope. Yeah, you're gonna believe some random article on a website? Like, no. Like, we need an actual fucking source from someone on Twitter or.
They were very low sales in that first quarter. But you know, back then you could have been like, it's been 1 month, it's the launch of the console, it's not really that big of a deal, I'm sure it'll carry on from here. Well, in this second quarter, those 3 months of July, August, and September, if you subtract 3.04 from the 7.56, now you're down to only 4.5 million software that was actually sold over the course of those 3 months.
Yeah, and he's conveniently ignoring the Switch 1 games. Okay, what a retard. Okay, debunked. Let's move on.
Has a 50% attachment rate, which means that, like, as of the end of September, you're looking at roughly 1.3 million copies of Donkey Kong Bonanza were sold in the United States. And we know that 2.6 million were sold worldwide. So half of all copies of Donkey Kong Bonanza were sold in the US, and the other half are spread out all throughout the entirety of the rest of the world. Which means if you rule out America from the equation, Bonanza did significantly worse on a worldwide scale than it did in the United States. This is basically a game that did pretty well in America. Again, not as
Wow, okay. So Donkey Kong, something that's always been very popular in America, more so than it has been in the rest of the world. Like, y'all, man, it did well in America, bro. Like, Donkey Kong, like, in America is, like, a major Nintendo icon, and not so much in Japan or the rest of the world. But anyway, okay, let's just skip this.
rate. There should have been a much larger Switch 1 title already available and ready to go. Remember, this is a console launching the Switch of the assets, dramatically increasing the amount of time between releases, drip feeding everything imaginable to artificially increase the life of these consoles significantly more so they can make more money by trying to push people to buy the same game for a longer amount of time instead of having to shift on to the next game, immediately killing all of the momentum for the previous one in the series. And honestly, many of these factors could easily be why so many people have had such a negative perception of the Nintendo Switch 2 despite they themselves buying the console early on in its life. Like, just off of the top of my head, this console should have launched with all of the Switch 2 editions already available. Why are they being drip-fed? They should have been available to purchase from day one. And likewise,
probably because they put a lot of work into the Switch 2 editions. Like, they add more content, they do more things. They're not just simple up-res ports, which is something that, like, this idiot doesn't seem to understand.
All of the free updates that we've seen that taken games like Odyssey, for example, and made it have a higher resolution and frame rate. There should have been a much larger Switch 1 title already available and ready to go. Remember, this is a console launching 8 years after its predecessor, and in the final 2 or 3 years of the Switch 1's life, we were kind of all just already on the way out of the Switch 1. People were coming into the Switch 2 really expecting to hit the ground running. We get the GameCube announced. Why is there not 10 to 15 GameCube games already available and ready to go day one on the Nintendo Switch 2? You know,
because they're longer games and it takes a while to play through them. There's no purpose in putting out 10 to 15 games at once. Like there are so many games on Nintendo Switch Online right now that most people have never played. Like, stop. You're embarrassing yourself. The release schedule for NSO is fine. I don't want to hear about it.
You know, after that April Direct, everybody was guessing what games were going to be coming out from now until the end of the year. They figured from June until the end of the year, there were going to be more games announced. I think the only game that was actually announced from a first-party perspective was Mario Galaxy 1 and 2. Nothing else was brought forward. How many people bought this console not realizing that the only games they would own until October, potentially, if not further along, was going to be Mario Kart World, which was basically forced to be a pack-in title whether you liked it or not, because the original Switch was not really in stock available until September 1st, and Donkey Kong Bonanza on July 17th. A game that people that are enthusiasts, and most people that buy consoles early on are enthusiasts, finished before the end of July. And then they sat there while Nintendo tried to push Star Wars Outlaws and Madden.
Yeah, Donkey Kong Bonanza, a game that got a DLC expansion a couple of months later. Okay, sure. Yeah, I was finished with Bonanza, yeah.
And all of the other third-party titles, and now we look back and it's like, oh, I wonder why the Switch 2 software sales are pretty abysmal right now. It's because of that. They didn't release any first-party titles. The console started off way too slow, and it's going to continue moving along very slow as time goes on. I mean, even when you
What are you talking about? We got we're getting 3 games in the next this month, like Hyrule Warriors, Air Riders, and then Metroid Prime 4 at the beginning of December. So that's 3 major titles, back to back to back. What are you talking about? There's just so many games coming out that I can't even keep track of them. They just put out Inazuma 11, things like that. Why am I supposed to believe that Nintendo is on the way out?
Consider the upcoming games, or the games that have launched since October. Like I said, Mario Galaxy 1 and 2 has the worst start of any 3D Mario in history.
Yeah, I'm sure. I am sure that Galaxy 1 and 2 are doing badly. Sure they are. They're the worst selling 3D Marios ever. What are you talking about? What are you talking about?
Worse than 3D World on the Wii U, to give you an idea. And this was a game that was available
3D World, a new game on Wii U, did better than Mario Galaxy. Okay, sure.
The Switch 1 and on the Switch 2. Pokemon Legends ZA, once again, a game that's available on the Switch 1 and on the Switch 2, and it's a game that's gotten a massive backlash, and deservedly so, and it's the worst
people who don't play the game, yeah.
Performing Pokemon game since the Switch 1, basically. Sales-wise, this is the first time we don't break some kind of record with a new Pokemon game.
Yeah, because Legends is not as popular as Mainline, for obvious reasons. It's a niche thing.
Sold worse than, obviously, Scarlet and Violet, because that's a 2-copy game, but also Legends Arceus. In fact,
no, I think the bigger issue with Scarlet and Violet is that it's the second best-selling Pokemon game ever now.
In fact, the only place that it did better than Legend Arceus on its first week was in Japan, but as quickly as the second week, it's already significantly dropped off in compared to Arceus, and now even with the third week, it's dropped off even more. These are all signs of more and more distaste and distrust coming from the Nintendo fandom towards Nintendo. Like now you have Hyrule Warriors, for example. That's a very niche game. It's not going to hit the population the way a banger would.
Yeah, it's number 1 on the bestsellers list, though.
Kirby Air Riders, oh man, this is a whole other tangent. I wanted to make a video about Kirby Air Riders. I should say a second video. I made one before. I think it's worth watching. Basically, in that video, I said that if Kirby Air Riders is the only holiday title for the Nintendo Switch 2, that's very underwhelming. And I say
it's not, though.
That as a massive fan of the original Kirby Air Riders, as well as a massive fan of Sakurai and all of his work. After the second Direct, I wanted to make another video about Kirby Air Riders, but there was just so much glaze out there in the algorithm that I was like, I'm not touching this.
Yeah. So Nintendeen kneels and acknowledges that there's so much hype around Air Riders now that there's nothing he can possibly do to downplay it. I know so many people like this that want to make negative coverage of Air Riders and just can't do it because everyone else is so enthusiastic about it. And it's a really good example of, I think, of just how Nintendo hate doesn't last long term, because the original Air Ride was massively hated when it first came out. Nobody liked that game. You saw a lot of people who were super confused about how well received Air Riders was when it was announced, and how hype it's been. Because all of them are just sitting there thinking that well, this was a bad GameCube game. Why are people hyped? Plenty of people love this game for what it is, and that's just the reality of it. All of these games that Nintendeen has dismissed in this video all have fan bases. They all have an audience. They all have people who will buy Nintendo Switch 2s for them. And Air Riders is a really good example of how you don't need to be a big AAA game to have like a lot of people hype for it.
Not yet. And it's not that I'm opposed to overly glazing a game, but I think at least people should be playing this game en masse before they start to really push it out there as the thing that's going to make everybody come together and be happy and harmonic about their purchases of their Switch 2s. I figured people should at least wait
I think Mario Kart World did that, but okay.
Until the playtest before they start overly glazing this game. The same thing happened with Sonic Racing Cross Worlds. But the difference was with Sonic Racing, there wasn't glaze until people played the game.
What?
Once people got...
What are you talking about? That is a cope. People were hyping up Cross Worlds like the instant it was announced. There wasn't any glaze, like, no. Like, Cross Worlds is like the most glazed racing game of the decade. Okay, you're talking about a mediocre game featuring like a 90s mascot character that's faded into obscurity that was hyped as being competitive with Mario Kart. Like, Sonic Racing Cross Worlds is like probably the most glazed racing game I've ever seen.
Got that free trial in there, played it for a weekend, then all of a sudden everybody was kind of like, yo, this is a very fun game and it might actually be better than Mario Kart. In the case of Kirby, I was going to be praising the title, but for a very different reason than what many others were doing. I wanted to praise the fact that Sakurai was being passionate about his game, was being very upfront and transparent about prices, about DLC, about updates, about what's available online, what's available offline. There was a lot that I appreciated about that presentation because Nintendo was not doing that for anything else. You went into Donkey Kong Bonanza being like, okay, hey, it's only a $70 game, it's not an $80 game, only to be slapped with a $20 DLC later on. And likewise with Pokemon, you found out that there's just so much locked behind additional dollars that didn't need to be spent. All of this stuff could have easily been included as free updates or as part of the main package. So I thoroughly and wholeheartedly appreciated that Sakurai was being upfront and he was selling the game based off of the merits of the game itself and not of this like, oh hey, keep you guessing, is it gonna be this or is it gonna be that? They were even providing a free playtest. I was really appreciating that, and I wanted to talk about that in my video, but everybody was already making videos about how this is going to be better than Mario Kart, and probably gonna be better than Sonic, and it's gonna be the best racing game. I'm like, let people play this game first before you start glazing it like that. And I feel so vindicated, because now that everybody's gotten their hands on Kirby Air Ride, you realize that it's like, this is not a game that's going to appeal to everybody. It's for a very niche audience, and most of that audience is going to be in Japan. And I described this in my
Yeah, this is like the age-old argument when it comes to like Nintendo hate. Like, oh man, they're only popular in Japan. Like, you hear this all the time as like some kind of cope, as if something that's popular in Japan can't become popular elsewhere. It's like, it's the default like just cope when it comes to Nintendo and honestly anime stuff in general. Like, well, it's popular in Japan, but that doesn't mean it'll be popular anywhere else. That is a giant cope. I don't want to hear it ever.
Kirby Air Ride video that I made way back after the first Sakurai Direct. But everything that I'm seeing online is almost verbatim what I said in that video. I said that what's going to happen is that the hardcore fandom that already likes Kirby Air Ride is going to be very hyped for this. We're going to put it out there, we're going to tell people to play with us, but most people are going to jump on this game assuming that it should be very simple and realizing that it's very chaotic and too complicated for them. Here's the difference between Sonic Racing Cross World and Kirby Air Riders. Sonic Racing Cross World's playtest caused people that were not intending on the game to actually decide to go out and buy it, and not only buy it, to spend $90 on it so they can get the deluxe edition. Kirby Air Riders, if you're looking at the online discourse, has caused people to cancel their pre-orders because it's too
People canceled their pre-orders. Like, when did this happen? Like, that's just what a giant cope. You know, when I saw Sonic Racing Cross Worlds, like, I kind of swore off Sonic Racing. You know, the instant I saw that thing, I decided that I wouldn't talk about it, I wouldn't address it, I wouldn't think about buying it. It wasn't going to happen because it looked so terrible. Nobody did that for Air Riders.
Complicated for them. And once again, this is going to be another hardcore game that's meant for the hardcore Nintendo fandom that's going to suffer because a large chunk of the hardcore Nintendo fandom is not buying the Switch 2. It's going to be the same thing that we saw happen with Donkey Kong Bonanza. a game that for all intents and purposes should be at a very high attachment rate, it's going to suffer because
Bonanza sold 3.5 million units, okay? The Switch 2 sold 10. Okay, so you're telling me that like selling a third of like the attachment rate is bad? Like that's just a giant cope. That is a delusional, just insane cope. I would be shocked if like Bonanza doesn't become the highest selling Donkey Kong game ever, but
because the people that are supposed to be buying it are not supporting Nintendo. They're emulating the Kirby Air Ride GameCube version on their PCs. Now,
oh no, not the emulator. Oh no, they'll emulate the 20-year-old game instead of buying the brand new one that everyone else is playing. Like emulation is not a cope. Okay, I don't want to hear it being brought up. It's illegal. Switch 2 still has not been cracked. Like I never want to hear people talking about emulation ever. Okay.
moving on from Kirby. Man, this is a long video. Something else that is very clearly worth noting is that Furukawa, in his presentation towards the shareholders, made a statement that everybody seems to have run away with. He's said that they are focusing their development now towards the Switch 2. Now, the funny thing is, I thought this was a nothing burger statement even the first time I read it. I was like, this is like the most corporate nothing statement ever, but people are running away with it as if it's such a big deal. Like, it's like, okay, what does focusing on Switch 2 development mean anyway? You guys are releasing a bunch of Switch 2 edition games. Is that what you're talking about? Because going forward, we got way more Switch 2 editions coming out if the past 6 months are anything to go by. Few weeks are. In regards to the Switch 2 sales and the shipped numbers versus the sold numbers, a big reason I am very focused on the sell-through versus the sell-in is primarily because there is just so much news the Switch 2, but either regret it or we've decided to not give Nintendo any more money. If you've already been holding out for this long, and you're somebody that's been considering just giving up and starting to go about it as is, accept that there's no point, start buying the Nintendo games that you want, and just give up on this whole idea of boycotting altogether, I would say you should give it until the end of this holiday. And this time, I'm saying the word boycott explicitly. I'm no longer talking backlashes, I'm no longer saying, hey, just like push back. I'm saying this is the chance. Obviously, if you're interested and you're inclined to see some kind of pushback against Nintendo, this holiday season, I think, is the moment where you should legitimately consider boycotting Nintendo and not giving.
Yeah, it's gonna fail. Okay, so yeah, what a giant like nothing burger of a video. It's just him trying to sit there and gaslight you into thinking that like Nintendo's selling 10 million units sold is somehow bad, that first party games aren't selling well, that third party games aren't selling well. Oh, but I won't provide a source, you know? Like it's so laughable. And we're at the point now where these people are sitting there and just telling you that, like, please, please, please boycott Nintendo throughout the holiday. Don't give them money. Like, please help my grift. And it's just, it's not going to happen. Nintendo is going to dominate this holiday season. They're going to stomp Xbox, PlayStation, the Steam machine. Like, every single console on the market is going to get wrecked by the Switch 2. And people like this are coping and seething about it, probably forevermore.